the indispensable nation is just a happy mythology we like to tell ourselves to justify policies that we happen to already do, many times for other reasons.
Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie with Reason TV. Today we're talking with Trevor Thrall. He is a senior fellow who covers defense and security issues at the Cato Institute. He's also a professor at George Mason University. Trevor, thanks for talking to us.
Nick, great to be here.
You have written a fair amount about the kind of Trump doctrine. Obviously, this is it's constantly be revised. It's like a Google Doc that probably has 50 different people, monkeying with it. How do you see, how can we meaningfully talk about Donald Trump's foreign policy and what it's likely to go towards?
Yeah, great question. I think he's so inconsistent. It is a little tricky putting your finger right on it, but I think we now know enough that we can identify at least three big pillars to start talking about it. The first is embodied in that America First tagline, and that is a sort of uber American nationalism. And what I think that really means at heart is that Trump is indifferent to really the project of the post-World War II American foreign policy regime, which was building and maintaining the liberal international order. He doesn't care about the liberal international order. He cares only about America, NATO, other allies, providing global public goods like safe passage in the ocean. He doesn't think or care much about any of those things. So that's number one. Number two is, on the other hand, you might think that made him sort of a dove or something, but I think the second thing is that he's actually sort of hawkish. He's actually I don't think he wants to intervene very often, doesn't care too much about the rest of the world, but when he does, I think he wants to bring the hammer. And so if you listen to his words about ISIS,
I'm going to bomb the shit out of them. It's true.
Eradicating radical Islam and stuff like that. So I think he's not interested in the general project of liberal internationalism, but when it comes to push and shove, I think he kind of has a zero-sum way of thinking about the world. We're going to win, and we're going to beat people up hard to do it. And then I think the third piece that we've seen very clearly, and also kind of stems from the America First tagline, is his economic nationalism, which is, again, a big break from the Republican Party for sure, but even from Democratic elites. So, trade war with China is on the horizon, that sort of stuff, tariffs, and no support really that I can see for free trade.
How problematic, I think a lot of people, certainly in the Republican establishment, and the Democratic establishment, I mean, they are freaking out every time that Trump or, whether it's Mattis or somebody else says to NATO, hey, you guys, you better pony up, otherwise we might just go away. Would that be catastrophic, not necessarily for America, but for the world? Because one of the arguments is you destabilize the liberal international order, you get more chaos, and then America is going to be called in anyway. Yeah. Having said that, if we don't change things, we're stuck with the status quo where we're spending, $1 bazillion a year on defense, much more than other countries. So how, what do you think?
The standard defense of overspending for the maintenance of the liberal international order is that the United States gets the most from maintaining this order, and so it's okay that we pay the most. So in other words, we're getting our money for our, value for our money. But Trump clearly does not believe that. And so his call to reassess, to put it gently, NATO and other arrangements with allies around the world is really freaking people out, because I think many people do believe that the U.S. is the indispensable nation. And if we aren't putting our hands over everything everywhere, trouble will burst out all over the place.
Is there, a lot of people believe that. Is that true?
I think that is an illusion. There may be special cases where that's true, but in fact I think the indispensable nation is just a happy mythology we like to tell ourselves to justify policies that we happen to already do, many times for other reasons.
So if we loosen up our standing on the sea lanes and in the Chinese seas and stuff like that, it doesn't mean Australia is suddenly going to become under the boot of China.
I see no reason why that would happen. I mean, remember, China is the country that's the biggest winner from the current liberal international order. Right. Are there a few things they might tweak? I suppose, but not the big pillars of non-intervention and sovereignty and stuff like that.
What is your sense of, the other more specific issue is Trump's bromance with Russia or with Putin. Should we be worried about Putin being an expansionist, or is he actually a nationalist? Because I've even had conversations with people who kind of sometime during the conversation they stopped saying Russia and they stopped saying the Soviets, and I mean, and that's understandable because that's the world that we were raised in and it's the world that dominated our thinking for 70 years. But is Putin so dangerous that we absolutely have to always be at a kind of Cold War with Russia?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I guess I would say, maybe. I think there's good reason for people in his neighborhood to be worried about him, for sure. I mean, just ask Ukraine. The Baltics obviously have reason, as they always have, to be near such a powerful neighbor. Anyone who doesn't have good relationships with the most powerful neighbor is got to be worried. But I don't see that being a threat to the United States, on the other hand. Whether Russia owns part of Ukraine or does not affect our national security. Russia's GNP is a little bigger than Mexico's right now. They are not a superpower.
So then how should the United States, or assuming that you would like to tweak elements of the American projection of power around the globe, what are the principles that should guide it? And these might be different than Trump's, but what do we do to, if not go full Ron Paul or George McGovern and bring the troops home, how do we start making better allocation decisions on how much we're sending around and to how many places?
I think, it's funny, it depends on which side of Trump you listen to, but I think, maybe like a broken clock that's right a couple times a day. Trump has said things that to me make a lot of sense. I think pulling back troops from the Middle East, we spent if we stopped the war today, we'd have spent $5 trillion in the last 15 years on the war on terror.
But look what we have to show for it.
Right? We have worse conditions than before 9/11 to show for it. Clearly, we can start by doing no harm and pulling back from active intervention around the world. Playing whack-a-mole with terrorists is a terrible idea. Then I think it is time to reassess alliances. Allies are people who help mutually ensure each other's safety. We don't have allies, we have clients. Europe is so rich, and it's very easy for them to pay for their own defense. They don't want to because they're rational people. They've got someone else to pay for it. I think we should reassess what we do with NATO. We don't need to be part of NATO. We can be a partner to NATO. We don't have to promise to be there and spend money to secure Europe. That seems to me to make very little sense. So Trump has frankly said a bunch of things that I'm not sure he got there the same way that I do in my mind, but he said some things that make perfect sense. We can pull back quite a bit.
Who, say in since World War II, what administration do you think put together the best, by your lights, the best national security team or kind of defense operations to, that got the job done well without overstepping either America's financial or ethical boundaries and things like that? Like who should we be modeling ourselves on?
That's a great question. I guess my favorite team is George Bush Sr.'s. It was.
So this is like Brent Scowcroft and George Shultz.
Yep, exactly right. And Bush himself. They were realists. They were very prudent. They didn't think the United States should engage in a lot of foreign intervention or nation building. I think they were. Although they did a couple of things.
The first Gulf War, right, which was,
the first Gulf War.
And even that was. I mean, it was interesting because I don't think it was justified, but then they also limited the scale of the operation.
They had some instincts that, having made sort of one, mistake in a sense, where I think they let themselves be influenced too heavily by sort of the existing Carter doctrine and the save the oil kind of thing. I think they then showed more prudence than anyone since has shown in limiting the U.S. military effort there, and also in making sure that they weren't doing this unilaterally. I think that's sort of underappreciated over the last 15 years. I think the U.S. has gotten ahead of the rest of the world, and that just begs for more problems.
A lot of libertarian foreign policy people or international relations people are some variety of realist, as you are. Talk a little bit about what that means and how we can sell it better, because I think it's a very attractive kind of sensibility for many people, but it oftentimes it's hard to. It doesn't hold up to crying children or dead people on a beach. Right.
Yeah. I guess the realist position really has a couple of basic principles that guide it, and the first is the simple understanding that the world is anarchic. and every nation is responsible for its own security. There is no 911 to call when your country's invaded. So this leads to a basic problem in world politics, which is every country is kind of out for itself, and things that each country does for its own security tends to make other countries nervous, because if I buy a bunch of tanks for my own defense, other people could reasonably assume these were for me to attack them with. And so that's really kind of the driving engine. And then what causes war, typically from a realist standpoint, or trouble, is when you have imbalances of power or quickly changing balances of power, and where countries get really nervous. Well, if a country nearby is getting powerful very quickly, I might have to attack them now to avoid getting beaten up later. And so the problem with this from a public standpoint is it sounds cold. It sounds calculating. You treat states like billiard balls on a pool table, thus colliding, instead of the human story underneath. People are dying and fighting and so on and so forth. And I think to sell this foreign policy better requires connecting the calculation to the emotion. So when you ask someone, why shouldn't we go help Syria? This is a tragedy. People are dying, don't you see? And you say, yes, I see that. But what you're asking is for Americans to go die instead. And why is that fair? And so it's a difficult conversation no matter how you do it, but I think that might help people understand why it's important to be restrained.
Well, we'll leave it there. We have been talking with the Cato Institute's Trevor Thrall. He's also a professor at George Mason University. Trevor, thanks for talking.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it.
For Reason TV, I'm Nick Gillespie. Different people, monkeying with it. How do you see, how can we meaningfully talk about Donald Trump's foreign policy and what it's likely to go towards?
Yeah, great question. I think he's so inconsistent, it is a little tricky putting your finger right on it, but I think we now know enough that
security issues at the Cato Institute. He's also a professor at George Mason University. Trevor, thanks for talking to us.
Nick, great to be here.
You have written a fair amount about the kind of Trump doctrine. Obviously, this is it's constantly be revised. It's like a Google Doc that probably has 50.
We can identify at least 3 big pillars to start talking about it. The first is embodied in that America First tagline, and that is a sort of uber American nationalism. And what I think that really means at heart is that Trump is indifferent to really the project of the post-World War II American foreign policy regime, which was building and maintaining the liberal international order. He doesn't care about the liberal international order. He cares only about America, NATO, other allies, providing global public goods like safe passage in the ocean. He doesn't think or care much about any of those things. So that's number one. Number two, the indispensable nation is just a happy mythology we like to tell ourselves to justify policies that we happen to already do many times for other reasons.
Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie with Reason TV. Today we're talking with Trevor Thrall. He is a senior fellow who covers defense and